Along the way, we encountered a number of checkpoints, most of which we passed through quickly as our vehicle had Israeli plates. Abid pointed out the observation posts, green turrets shielding Israeli soldiers who maintained a constant vigil over the Palestinians. He also drew our attention to the Jewish settlements among the hills, surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by their own local militia. Some Israelis have relocated to the West Bank to avoid the taxes in Jerusalem. Others have come because they believe they have a divine mandate to possess the land. There were also illegal settlements, unplanned, yet clearly acknowledged by the government as witnessed through the presence of utility poles. Abid took pride noting that all the Palestinian fields were organic. Indeed, we saw farmers still tilling their fields with horses and oxen, and shepherds still keeping faithful vigil over their flocks throughout the rugged terrain of the West Bank. Of course, one of my thoughts that I couldn't say to Abid is I wondered whether it was organic because they're not allowed any fertilizers, which, you know, are components of weapons of destruction. As we drew near to our destination that morning, I asked Abid what he thought as a Palestinian Muslim, whether a two-state solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians was possible. He replied with an old saying for complicated situations. Does the devil have a home in paradise? The psalm this morning, or rather song, was sung as the early Hebrews made their way to Jerusalem to worship at the temple while they were celebrating the festivals of their faith. How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. Such words take into consideration that the narrow streets that interweave throughout the old city of Jerusalem would have been packed with pilgrims and vendors and soldiers and livestock. How good it is then when everyone gets along and they don't step on each other's feet or cause a commotion or start a stampede. It's sort of like a family dinner. When everyone gets along, no one starts an argument, the children behave themselves, and the food is served on time. The psalmist must have been aware of the irony in these words. The history of the Hebrews is a witness to the fact that families do not always get along. Cain killed his brother Abel. Abraham sent Hagar, his slave, and the wife of his child, and their newborn infant Ishmael out into the desert. Jacob stole his brother's birthright. The sons of Jacob sold their brother Joseph into slavery. Yet, it would be good indeed if we all got along. But the reality is that unity is a vision to which we aspire rather than a reflection of the way things are. If we confuse the vision with the reality in which we live, it only makes it harder to build a sustainable peace. As members of the chapel, our strength is not in our single-mindedness, for I can assure you that we are not of one mind about a lot of things. Rather, our strength arises from our willingness to abide with one another despite our differences. Overlooking Nablus, on the top of Mount Gerizim, the first capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, is a Samaritan village. Prior to going to Israel, I felt well acquainted with the Samaritans through the biblical stories, as well as from what I had learned in seminary. Yet it had never occurred to me that the Samaritans might still exist. Nor had I anticipated encountering a culture that traces its high priesthood back to Adam. A community that worships using ancient Hebrew, a people desperate to preserve the rituals of their culture. There are only about 700 Samaritans left. There, within a makeshift synagogue, within the home of the next high priest of the Samaritans, we encountered a vision that transcended its particularity as a threatened culture strangers at the gate. Who would have expected that a Muslim would have introduced us to a Jew who hungers to preserve his culture and his people, yet who was equally committed to building relationships among Christians and Jews, Jews and Muslims and Christians? Later I mentioned to Abid that I was taught in seminary that the Samaritan culture developed after the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. That the Samaritan culture was the result of an intermingling of peoples brought about by the Assyrians. This was the reason, because of the impurity of their blood, that the Samaritans were despised by their Jewish brethren. Abid replied to me, "That is what some say about them. Now you have heard what they have to say about themselves." Does the devil have a home in paradise? Perhaps the greatest challenge of interfaith dialogue is not to give way to despair. Abid's question has less to do with the tension between Islam and Judaism than the political reality that has engulfed his life. The beginning of dialogue is to embrace our own fallibility, the ways we have distorted the cornerstones of our faith for our own benefit. There is something about the psalm this morning that transcends our broken humanity. For irrespective of our disunity, the blessings of God fall upon us all. I still recall the morning when I looked upon Mount Hermon as the sun rose over the mountains. Surely the dew knows no boundaries. Why should we?